May the 1st, 305 A.D. A sprawling military assembly gathers on a wind-swept plain outside the city of Nicomedia in Asia Minor. At the center of the legion stands a man who holds the known world in his hands, draped in the purple robes of absolute, unquestioned authority. He is the undisputed savior of Rome, the hardened architect of its resurrection from 50 years of blood-soaked anarchy. Yet in a moment that will echo through millennia, he steps forward, unfastens his imperial cloak, and surrenders the throne. This was Emperor Diocletian, a ruler who shattered every precedent of the ancient world. To possess the Roman Empire was the ultimate intoxicating dream of generals and senators alike, a prize paid for in rivers of blood and generations of betrayal. But Diocletian gained total power only to realize the only way to save the empire was to give it away. His voluntary abdication remains one of history's most profound paradoxes, exposing the crushing weight of a crown that had murdered nearly everyone who wore it before him. To comprehend the sheer audacity of this surrender, one must look back into the abyss from which he pulled the state. For half a century before his reign, Rome endured a catastrophic nightmare known as the crisis of the 3rd century. The Pax Romana, the long peace that had defined the empire's golden age, had violently fractured into a chaotic free-for-all of usurpers, plagues, and devastating barbarian incursions. During this grim 50-year span, dozens of ambitious men claimed the imperial title. Almost all of them were slaughtered by their own troops. The average life expectancy for a reigning emperor was barely 2 years. The empire literally split into 3 warring factions, with the Gallic Empire breaking away in the west and the Palmyrene Empire severing the east. Rome was bleeding out, its economy hyperinflated, and its legions exhausted by endless grinding civil war. Out of this suffocating darkness rose a man of strikingly obscure origins. Born as Diocles in the rugged province of Dalmatia, he was not a patrician nurtured in the marble halls of the Senate, but a low-born soldier who clawed his way up the ranks of the Roman military. His survival in the treacherous environment of the 3rd century legions required a ruthless intellect, a calculating patience, and an iron will forged in constant warfare. By 284 A.D., Diocles commanded the imperial cavalry under Emperor Numerian. When Numerian was found dead in his closed litter retreating from Persia, the legions gathered to choose a successor. In a masterful display of political theater, Diocles drew his sword, accused the Praetorian prefect Aper of the murder, and struck him down before the assembled troops. With that single lethal stroke, the soldiers hailed him as Emperor Diocletian. The blood on his blade secured the throne, but he inherited a realm that was structurally doomed. A single ruler could not simultaneously repel Germanic tribes crossing the Rhine, suppress revolts in Britannia, and hold back Sassanid Persians on the Euphrates. The borders were simply too vast. The traditional response, delegating command to a trusted general, was deeply flawed. The moment a general achieved a major victory, his loyal legions would inevitably proclaim him emperor, sparking another devastating civil war. Diocletian understood the empire was too vast for one man, yet too volatile to share with a subordinate. His solution was radical. He elevated a trusted comrade, Maximian, to the supreme rank of co-emperor. Maximian stabilized Gaul in the west, while Diocletian held the east. This diarchy allowed 2 distinct imperial presences to secure the frontiers simultaneously, stripping rebellious generals of their monopoly on victory. Yet even 2 emperors proved insufficient. In 293 A.D., Diocletian expanded his bold experiment into the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4. He and Maximian retained the senior titles of Augusti, each appointing a junior Caesar to serve and eventually succeed them. The Tetrarchy divided the Roman world into 4 zones, ensuring an imperial presence near every critical frontier. Galerius, Diocletian's Caesar, guarded the Danube, while Constantius, Maximian's Caesar, secured the Rhine and Britannia. This intricate web was cemented by dynastic marriages, and a newly engineered religious ideology. Diocletian wrapped the Tetrarchy in divine authority, aligning himself with Jupiter, while Maximian was tied to Hercules. This elevated the emperors above mortal politics. They were no longer mere first citizens, they were living embodiments of divine will, untouchable and supreme. The impact of this four-headed imperial machine was immediate. Borders were aggressively fortified with new stone installations. Rebellions in Egypt and Britain were crushed with methodical efficiency, and the Sassanid Persians suffered a humiliating defeat, ceding vast territories in Mesopotamia. Projecting a unified, terrifying strength for the first time in generations, Diocletian used this shield of military victory to unleash sweeping administrative reforms. Recognizing the old provincial system was a breeding ground for ambitious governors, he sliced the existing provinces into much smaller units, nearly doubling their number. This fragmentation drastically reduced the resources of any single governor, making it nearly impossible for them to raise a private army. To manage this sprawling new grid, he constructed a massive layered bureaucracy. The military and civil administrations were strictly separated, severing the traditional link that allowed generals to collect taxes and governors to command troops. The state became a highly centralized, autocratic machine, with power flowing directly from the imperial courts rather than the ancient, now sidelined Senate in Rome. However, his attempts to control the chaotic Roman economy met with far less success. Decades of debased currency had fueled rampant inflation, destroying the purchasing power of the legions. In a desperate bid to halt the economic death spiral, Diocletian issued the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 AD. This monumental decree attempted to fix the absolute cost of everything from a measure of wheat to the daily wage of a stonemason. The edict was an unmitigated economic disaster. Despite the threat of the death penalty for violators, merchants simply withdrew their goods from the open market, creating massive shortages and fueling a thriving, untraceable black market. The inflexible laws of supply and demand proved to be the one force that even the divine authority of Jupiter's representative could not conquer. The decree was quietly abandoned, a rare admission of imperial limitation. Diocletian's pursuit of absolute unity also cast a dark, violent shadow over his later reign. Viewing the growing Christian population as a subversive threat to the traditional Roman religion and the ideological foundation of the Tetrarchy, he initiated the Great Persecution. Churches were dismantled, scriptures burned, and thousands executed in the arena. Yet this brutal suppression ultimately failed to extinguish the rising faith, revealing the limits of imperial terror. By late 304 AD, the relentless strain of pulling a dying empire back to life had taken its toll. Diocletian, now in his 60s, collapsed from a severe illness while traveling. He lingered on the edge of death for months, hidden away in his palace at Nicomedia. When he finally emerged in early 305 AD, he was a frail, emaciated ghost of the formidable commander he had once been. It was in the quiet aftermath of this physical collapse that the emperor made his final, defining calculation. He had spent 2 decades constructing a system designed to ensure a peaceful transfer of power, a mechanism to bypass the bloody civil wars of the past. To prove the Tetrarchy worked, he had to step away. He had to test the machinery of succession while he was still alive to enforce it. And so, on that windswept plain outside Nicomedia, the architect of Rome's survival surrendered his power. He convinced a highly reluctant Maximian to abdicate simultaneously in the West. The 2 Caesars were elevated to Augusti, and 2 new Caesars were appointed. The system, for that brief shining moment, functioned exactly as designed. The transition was bloodless, orderly, and entirely unprecedented in the annals of Roman history. Leaving the intoxicating center of global power behind, Diocletian traveled to his homeland on the Dalmatian coast. There, he retreated into the palace of Diocletian, a colossal, heavily fortified compound he had spent years constructing near modern-day Split. It was half luxury villa, half military fortress, a perfect architectural reflection of the paranoid, pragmatic mind that had designed it. Within those massive stone walls, the former master of the world found a strange, quiet peace. He traded the bloody chess game of imperial politics for the simple, grounding rhythms of agriculture. He spent his final years tending to his gardens, cultivating vegetables in the Mediterranean sun, entirely detached from the frantic ambitions that consumed the men who replaced him. The tragedy of his abdication was that the Tetrarchy was fundamentally reliant on his towering, terrifying presence. Without Diocletian to enforce the rules, the system rapidly descended into factional infighting. The new emperors and their ambitious sons soon turned on one another, plunging the Roman world back into the very civil wars the system was expressly designed to prevent. As the empire fractured once more, desperate delegates arrived at his palace in Split, begging the old emperor to return, to don the purple one last time and restore order to the chaos. His response, recorded by historians, perfectly encapsulates the profound realization of a man who had survived the ultimate summit of human power and recognized its hollow core. He told the panicked emissaries that if they could only see the beautiful cabbages he had planted with his own hands, they would never ask him to trade his peace for the nightmare of the empire. Emperor Diocletian died in his fortress, one of the only men in Roman history to voluntarily lay down absolute power, understanding that true survival meant knowing exactly when to walk away.